Well, good morning, Isabel. It's wonderful to have you here. Thanks for joining us
Morning.
virtually. It's unfortunate we couldn't all get together for our awards event earlier this year, but hopefully that will happen next year. So just quick introductions. I'm Will Glasgow, the Director of Development at Preservation Virginia, and we have Sonia, my colleague here. Do you want to introduce yourself first?
I'm Sonia Ingram. I'm the Preservation Field Services Manager at Preservation Virginia.
Wonderful. And I believe Isabel and Sonia, y'all have known each other a lot longer than we've all been connected. So I think was it the 2018 conference that we had down in Danville that you participated as a panelist there, Isabel?
Mm-hmm. Sonia's brought me to Danville a couple times in the last few years now.
Yeah, sure. We need help in Danville, so we're always happy to see you. As a matter of fact, I need you to talk to you to come back. So
you can come anytime.
Right.
There's definitely been a lot of restoration and preservation work in both Danville and Roanoke. I think sometimes there's a little bit of a misnomer that it seems like only like Richmond or Norfolk has benefited from projects like historic tax credits, but the reality is that cities all across the Commonwealth are seeing the benefits of programs like that. But Isabel, y'all are Restoration Housing is the recipient of the Gabriella Page Award, which is named for one of our longtime presidents. It recognizes a property owner, architect, design firm, or contractor for residential, commercial, or public sector projects that best exemplifies the use of preservation standards and brings an outstanding building in appropriate and relevant contemporary use. So congratulations to you, Isabel, and Restoration Housing on that much-deserved award.
Thank you so much. We're honored to be the recipients. It's very flattering, and it's for a project that we're all really proud of. So it's great to be honored that way. Thank you.
Sure. Well, and Isabel, we did want to start, just the first question is, how did Restoration come to be? Just a little bit about your background and how you came to start this nonprofit.
Sure. So it can be a long story. I'll try to keep it short, but I studied architectural history as an undergraduate at UVA. Have always loved architectural history. And after graduation, I worked for a few years in New York before going to graduate school in historic preservation at the University of Southern California. And when I was there, I don't know exactly how, I think it was that I was really interested in sustainability and architecture and architectural history and urban design. So I started taking courses in the School of Public Policy, and I decided to get kind of the graduate equivalent of a minor, which was a certificate in sustainable cities in the policy school. So I was in all these urban planning classes, and the urban planners then and now were very interested in affordable housing. And so I was predominantly in the architecture school, but then dipping my toes in urban planning, and really became interested in how architectural history, historic preservation, and urban planning's focus on affordable housing could all be mixed together. There was not a lot to show for it, but I just felt instinctively like they made sense together. Somehow affordable housing and preservation made sense. I've been able to really articulate that much better now, but not then. So I was dipping my toes, and I started working for a nonprofit that built affordable housing for formerly homeless people in Los Angeles. And I just they were a large nonprofit developer. All they built was affordable housing. They were trying to do rehabs using historic tax credits with low-income housing tax credits. And that's really, where I fundamentally decided I love development. I love trying to build affordable housing, and I like the way you can use your existing buildings of your city. Cut to graduation, I moved back to Roanoke and started working with community housing partners. They're down in Christiansburg, doing great work with affordable housing. And again, I wanted to be on the development side, but the only job they had available was basically an internship with their design studio, and I was doing all their historic tax credit applications. So they similarly would twin historic and low-income housing tax credits. And so it was these two large nonprofit developers that I worked with that I think planted the seed of interest for my interest in being a developer. But I liked the idea of being more specifically integrated in preservation doing more specifically like community-based work in Roanoke, whereas Community Housing Partners was sort of all over the state. They're all over the South. They're in Kentucky, Tennessee, you name it. And then I was also interested in starting a family and having less of I had a pretty bad commute from Botetourt to Christiansburg. So I decided to start this nonprofit that could be community focused in Roanoke, that would give me, flexibility. And frankly, I'm from Roanoke. I love the historic buildings here. I drive through the historic neighborhoods often and just see a lot of vacancy and deterioration, and it is sort of sad. And I wanted to see, what if you could do something with these vacant houses and these beautiful neighborhoods using tax credits and make that the nonprofit that creates affordable housing. It was like this wild idea. My husband and I talked about it on our honeymoon. I remember we were on a long walk, and it might have been his idea, I think. And so because it was his idea, I was like, surely it's a great idea and not risky at all. I should go for this. We just decided to start it from there. So now it's been 6 years later. We have our sixth house in purchase contract right now. And so kind of doing one house a year. And is it sixth house or fifth house? Hold on. Yeah, it's our sixth house. So it's been growing steadily. I think we're outside of the startup phase, but it is it's this dual interest in these two things, basically.
Great. Well, we're so thrilled to see Villa Heights in Roanoke as one of your projects and how it was rehabbed and successfully reused. It was actually on our most endangered historic places list back in 2007, along with some other historic buildings there in Roanoke. Can you tell us a little bit more about that particular project and how things are going with that?
Sure. Yeah, that Villa Heights is probably still my favorite of all the houses we've rehabbed. It's just really, it's really beautiful. It's a beautiful house. It was beautiful even when it was vacant, and it just has this amazing history to it. So I feel very connected to it, even though I only check in physically there once every couple of weeks. But it started about 3 years ago. No, wait, yeah, a little over about 3.5 years ago. Our organization first started looking into, putting a proposal into the city to see if this was a viable project. Deciding if it was viable meant that we had to kind of check off a lot of due diligence that normally isn't required for other projects. So we went into like a purchase contract with the city that was meant to be a year long to get it listed on the National Register, so it'd be eligible for tax credits, and then see if we were eligible for community development block grant funding. So there were all these kind of things that had to happen before we were meant to take ownership of it. And so that was, it took I would say about 2 years. As you all probably know, it takes about a year to get something listed on the National Register. So that was a huge process. And then once it was listed, we, started, getting all of our construction drawings and our grants lined up. We took ownership from the city. We started construction in 2018. Or was it late 17? I honestly can't remember now. I had a baby in late 2017, so it's a bit blurry. But anyway, so we started in 18. And construction took about a year, and it was a dramatic transformation. So this house had been vacant for over 10 years. It was last used as an after-school rec center by the city. So it had all these great like recreational, it had a rec room that was added in the 1960s, ADA compliant bathrooms, an ADA ramp, and this huge park around it. It's about 3.5 acres. So it's a great resource as like a community center already, as it is, on top of the fact that it's a 200-year-old, classical revival structure that is surrounded by 200-year-old oak trees. And it's just a stunning property. So anyway, it had been vacant for 10 years and had a hole in the roof for 6 years from a fire that it had had in 2011. lots of damage, as you can imagine. The exposed hole in the roof, I won't go into how frustrating that was just exposed. But that led to like complete deterioration of, plaster walls, floor systems for 2 levels underneath it, and lots of water damage and mold. And then on top of that, you had the fire damage throughout the house, and then just vacancy, period, that causes a lot of deterioration. So the project was quite large for us. We used community development block grant funding. We had city fire insurance money, and then we had the tax credits, state and federal. And then all combined, we were able to basically cover all of the costs. We finished the construction in 2019 and leased it to a church, a local church called Kingdom Life Ministries. They're based in Northwest, just a few blocks from the house, and they sublease the interior to 3 nonprofits. So they sublease it to, they have several offices upstairs, but then the nonprofits are also able to use the downstairs for co-working, communal office space, board meetings, that sort of thing. So, and then also for programmatic space in the rec room. One of the nonprofits does a lot of after-school mentorship. Another does after-school arts and performance and that sort of thing. So the rec room and the parkland have really come in handy. So it's kind of like this nonprofit hub, and all of them are interested in being in that neighborhood and serving that neighborhood. It is an underserved neighborhood in Roanoke. And so it's now become this great resource for the neighborhood that, whereas it was just blighting the neighborhood for 10 years before. And I think that, it just really, having, as you all probably know, just having people inside of a building, what a dramatic effect that has on top of the obvious tangible effects of, increasing property values and, just reinvesting in the neighborhood. So it's a project I feel, really proud of, but then I feel really proud of the nonprofits that are there and what they're doing. And it's been a great, I think an ideal outcome.
Yeah. I mean, what a great story. We just want to get that story out into the public as much as we can. That's exactly what preservation can do. And the before and after pictures are amazing. I mean,
walking through the before, I wish more people could have seen it. It was a safety hazard, so I would not have wanted more people to actually go inside of it, but it was just so far gone. I mean, I can't tell you, the average person would have said, you need to demolish this. But we had, contractors, architects, engineers, you name it, come in and say, is this salvageable? And they said, yes, it is. So, people in that business have seen worse. And they were like, if this can be done. And so they gave us the thumbs up. And again, I was just like, if they're saying it's okay, then it's okay. Go ahead with it. So it did turn out really well. We're very, very excited for it.
Well, and certainly, finding ways to marry historic preservation and affordable housing and environmental issues certainly seems to be the future and what we should all be thinking about and doing forward. And you all certainly embody that in the work that you do. And it seems like the 2 worst enemies of any building would be sitting empty and water.
Absolutely. Absolutely. If you have the tiniest hole in your roof, please cover it up. Please, please.
Mm-hmm. Well, and Isabel, as far as this past year has gone, how have you approached your work differently during the pandemic? How has COVID forced you to adapt and try different things?
Yeah, I mean, I think we are lucky. A lot of nonprofits have just like a complete halt to their revenue sources if they're a museum or a theater or something like that. We're lucky that we haven't seen a dramatic halt to what we do. We have a project under construction that has remained under construction under COVID. It's supposed to be finished at the end of this month. I'm going to just go ahead and assume it's going to be about 2 weeks after that, but it's been going. We are, I'm still meeting with my tenants fairly regularly. There's a lot that sort of is business as usual, but the ways that we've shifted are what pretty much everybody is shifting to go virtual in so many ways. So we started doing this series over the summer called the Architectural Minute series that was meant to just stay engaged with our supporters and talk about each property that we've done in these little segments. Again, like we were talking about earlier, these were very low budget videos, and by low budget I mean no budget. So there's a dramatic contrast to those, and then what we're now doing, which is we launched our virtual campaign last week, which is in lieu of our annual fundraiser. Our annual fundraiser is our one big fundraiser a year, where we try to bring everybody together that has been supporting us and that lives locally. I guess we have supporters outside of Roanoke too, but it's meant to really engage with the community because our work is so community focused. Even if we don't make a lot of money from it, which, definitely in the beginning we didn't, it's just a great way to share our message and what we're doing and what our next project is and so on. So without being able to do that, we shifted to a virtual campaign this year that's a month-long series of these little videos telling the story of what we do. And we had a sponsor that really was so helpful to pay for the cost of our videographer. So they're finally like professional quality videos. And so that remains to be seen if it will be effective from a donation standpoint. I think definitely all nonprofits are scared of what donations look like. We are certainly, I rebuilt our annual budget back in June, and the board approved our new budget in July that anticipates a dramatic loss in fundraising. And it made me feel like, okay, now if we know what this dramatic loss will be like, it's our worst case scenario and we'll still be okay. And so that's sort of where we are now, just hoping that we make it to okay. And it's very difficult as a nonprofit, just not knowing what to expect, not only this year, but next year, and not wanting to offend people by asking for money, but also kind of desperately needing to at the same time. We have a diverse set of revenue from both rental incomes and grants and management fees and our donations. So while they're diverse and we don't rely only on donations, they're still pretty critical. So I would say that was the biggest pivot for us is just trying to reach people and tell our story and hope that we're still connecting. And some of the other smaller issues I've had, employees are leaving to homeschool kids. The things that I think everybody in a business world, especially a small business, are dealing with right now. So there are a lot of shifting things that we're just shifting with those shifts as we go. But as I was saying before, with our virtual campaign, the silver lining to it is that, we get tenant testimonials. We're going to each property. We're filming testimonials from my contractor. We even got a performance from, some of the kids that play drums after school at Villa Heights. And so there are all these great ways for our supporters to see things more directly than they normally would be able to. And I'm excited for that because at our luncheon, we would have some exciting speaker, and we maybe would show a few pictures of what we're up to next, but we wouldn't necessarily have these more direct personal stories about what we do. And so it's a shift that I think ultimately will be really helpful for us to have that kind of footage too, from a marketing perspective.
Sure. And I think it's a good point to plan for the worst and just hope that you come in above that.
Yeah.
And also the fact that everyone's in the same boat, we're all dealing
Exactly.
with this. So it's not like it's just one sector, one community, we're all, but at the same time, it's forcing us to get creative,
Mm-hmm.
which in a way has been, kind of fun and inspiring for the staff. I mean, it's unfortunately with the backdrop of everything going on with COVID, but it's really pulled our staff together in a lot of ways
Mm-hmm.
because of that. But I wonder next year, what is it going to look like when we're trying to do both? I feel like we're going to want to continue to do the
Mm-hmm.
digital productions and the in-person events. So how are we going to pull double duty?
I know. I think 2021 is probably for me I'm always planning years ahead with development too. It's a year that I'm a little more nervous about. So I don't want to sound dismal, but we'll just see it as we keep shifting as we go. So we'll wait till we get a little closer to it.
Sure, sure.
Okay, well, I'll go on to the next question. So you already talked about this a little bit, and your interest in architecture and development and some of the jobs that you've had and how much you love Roanoke and the historic neighborhoods. But for you personally, was there sort of an aha moment or a historic site or something that really grabbed you and spurred your interest in historic preservation?
Yeah, when I saw that question, I was trying to think if there was a very specific aha moment, and I couldn't think of one. I think that it probably just, my interests go back to probably just very, very, very fundamental. My parents both love, my mom, majored in art history, and my dad loves architectural history. My grandfather was a professor of history. There's just sort of a lot of that in our family that, we were always going to house museums growing up and museums and, touring Biltmore or touring Kikett or something. And so we just always did those things my whole life. I don't know that there was like one building. So when you said one building, okay, the first thing that came to mind was a compound, was just UVA. I mean, I went to UVA and I grew up going there, because my dad went there. So we grew up visiting Monticello a lot. And I mean, that just is a fundamentally like undeniably inspiring building, and the school is such an inspiring compound. So I did think that was probably very formidable, both going there as a child and then going there as a student. And I don't know how, but when I was applying to to UVA as an undergrad, you apply to the architecture school and you have to pick your major when you apply to the architecture school. So I picked that I wanted to study architectural history as like an 18-year-old applying to college. And I don't really know how I was so certain of that then, but I knew I didn't want to be an architect, and I knew I loved architecture. So it's sort of something forced that, knowing there really weren't many alternatives, I guess. But then, as a preteen, I think my dad organized a trip for us to go to Los Angeles to the Gamble House. And that was also very formidable because I ended up studying architectural history in Los Angeles as a graduate student. And my parents didn't really love that I was going so far away for graduate school. And I said, Dad, you're the reason I went there. Like, you took us to the Gamble House. It's just such an amazing house in Pasadena, green and green. And my dad loved green and green so much that he actually designed the house that we lived in Roanoke off of a green and green kind of aesthetic. And, it was one of those things, like, couldn't be more different than Monticello and UVA, but very similarly impactful. And my graduate school experience, I ended up writing my thesis on bungalow courts in Pasadena that are like the little miniature house versions of the ultimate bungalows, which is what the Gamble House was, an ultimate bungalow. And I think that says a lot, that house probably had such a huge impact on me, because I lived really far away from Pasadena. I lived in Venice Beach, and I'd commute all the way there to write about these little bungalows, because I clearly just got in my blood while I was a young teen there.
That's right.
So it just goes to show that there's great history everywhere.
It really is. In Los Angeles, I have to speak on behalf of it because it has such a bad reputation, but it has some of the most interesting modern architecture that you can find in the country. And there's a California modernism that I think is in a canon of modernism now, but it wasn't when I was an undergrad. And so I didn't study a lot of it. But when I went out there for graduate school, I discovered just rich, fascinating school of architecture there, and beautiful buildings. They're kind of tucked away in the hills, so you can't see them as well. And there's so much there that people maybe don't value as much because of, everything about LA that gets, the bad reputation, the driving, the interstates, the smog, the tacky architecture. It overpowers what's really fascinating there. So if you can go, I highly recommend it. There's a lot of really cool stuff to see, and especially in Pasadena.
Well, and I know some Virginians are guilty of being, and I grew up here, so I can say it,
Yeah.
guilty of being sort of Virginia centric. So.
Oh, totally. Well, that's what I was saying. Like at UVA, no one talked about California modernism. They were all about the Chicago school or, New York. And when I went to USC, I was like, wait, what's California modernism? And you'd realize like all the architects that we'd studied in modernism that started in Chicago and New York went to LA and landed there and stayed there. I was like, wait, this seems like kind of relevant. Shouldn't we have talked about this more? But Virginia didn't want to go there, so maybe now they are, but I was there, in the early aughts, so
sure.
They didn't at the time.
Well, and I think we're finding that it's interesting, according to the Department of Interior, anything 50 years or older, right? It's
well, that's where, so LA was right. Everything was turning 50, right? Like, all the post-war stuff was like literally ding, 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 turning 50, that year. But there was a lot of great stuff too from the early, like the 20s and 30s, and Richard Neutra. And all of that stuff is just fantastic to see. And we were going in graduate school to old Frank Lloyd Wright, like block textile houses that were falling apart, and getting to explore them and talk about how to preserve them. And no one wanted them. No one wanted to be in those houses. And it's kind of fascinating to think about, like just a empty Frank Lloyd Wright house that no one cares about. Now, granted, the textile block houses are kind of damp and dark and not that inviting, but it's just such a cool place to study that stuff. I really enjoyed it.
Sure. Well, it goes to show, historic resources don't have to be ancient to have intrinsic value,
Exactly.
You got to think about the long term, that how many things in 1900 that were 50 years old were torn down, and we're like, gosh, we wish that building was still here,
Yeah. So if either of you ever go to LA, I'd love to give you, lists of where to go, because there's so many cool buildings to see too.
And including a map of the stars too, right?
I never did that. And I'm not too cool for it. I just didn't. LA is just so huge. It's just too much to do. It's 72 counties. It's just massive.
Yeah, it's different being from Richmond, where you think you're in a big city, but it's really not when you get outside of the state. But Isabel, along with the pandemic, there's been so many social conversations this year around public history and who we honor and where. And where we go from here in terms of telling a more full and honest narrative, which we certainly all have a role to play in that. So our question to you is, do you see like the role of, whether it be local historic societies or preservation groups in general, their missions broadening, or just, how do we address that moment and that conversation appropriately right now?
I've seen that a shift in awareness on that topic for the last few years. Definitely the local preservation foundation here, the Roanoke Valley Preservation Foundation, did a little talk about I think kind of the confluence of social justice and preservation maybe 2 or 3 years ago. I would say it was maybe early 2018. And it was on their radar as something that I think is really relevant. And as you all know, with the event you all did in 2018 in Danville, and Sonia invited me to, and we talked about the same topic, kind of the need for a social impact component to what preservation is doing. And I think that there's clearly been, over the last few years, a movement in that direction, which I think is really encouraging. And that sort of goes back to what I was saying before, where I was dipping my toes in the subject of urban planning and preservation, not really sure like how they overlapped at the time from a intellectual standpoint. I knew that they did, but you kind of have to live a little bit more in the world of development to see it. And so it's really clear to me, I think, when you look, especially in Roanoke's neighborhoods, but you can translate this all over the Commonwealth. the neighborhoods in Roanoke that need the most preservation, that need revitalization, are neighborhoods that have been systematically devalued. And so there's just like a fundamental social justice component to reinvesting in those neighborhoods. The neighborhood and where Villa Heights is, I mean, this was a building that had been vacant for 10 years. That was one of the oldest, most beautiful buildings in Roanoke. I mean, it was built before Roanoke County, before Salem. It was here before there was a city. And it was just treated like not worthy of any kind of investment or care. And so what I am really interested in each of our projects is just kind of digging into why those buildings are vacant in the first place, why these neighborhoods are devalued. And you know, it always comes back to a lot of urban planning issues of, you know, why people leave the first rung suburbs outside of a downtown. Often it's because, you know, they wanted more access to cars. They wanted larger pieces of land. People move out because, you know, the older homes, the turn of the century, don't really serve a more modern way of living in mid-century living. But there was a large exodus mid-century of these neighborhoods, and then a lot of these houses were purchased at distressed prices and then kind of just bled down to barely inhabitable kind of conditions. But then a big part of it is also a racial part of, you know, either redlining or deed restrictions, and just kind of like all of these tools that cities and the federal government participated in to devalue or make it difficult for other neighborhoods to gain wealth or gain investment. And so you start to see kind of patterns of why neighborhoods become vacant or buildings become vacant. And they're just broad patterns that tell a story about, I think, ultimately unfavorable things that cities and governments have done. And so, and then the decisions that people make based off those policies. You know, people are very, you know, there was sort of a mass exodus to the suburbs in mid-century. And so those things are not ideal, but they're part of our living fabric. And how do we look at what I think are Roanoke's greatest assets are these older, beautiful neighborhoods, older, beautiful buildings, and turn back to them, reinvest in them, and keep them affordable to the people that are already living there, not pushing them out of it. But then I think also calling attention to why reinvestment is important, why there was disinvestment in the first place, and then how can we collectively as a society try to prevent that from happening again.
Right. Excellent. Well, and it reminds me of at the Danville conference that you spoke at, Donovan Ripkema, our keynote speaker, made a really compelling argument that the reality is there's enough building stock in America for everyone to have a home if we just rehab and reuse, you know?
Right. And so that sort of goes back to the sustainability component. When I was in graduate school, I was really interested in the sustainable side of development because I hated seeing these you know, greenfield pieces of land being developed into houses that, you know, were maybe not as well constructed, and you're building all this new infrastructure, and it's such a big surge of energy being used to build new when you have so much there already to work with. It seemed to me like so much just inherently sustainable to use an existing building. And even if you're putting a lot of money into the restoration, which we are, and some people might think that doesn't make sense from an economic perspective, it's often still less than what building new would cost. But then also being a nonprofit, we're able to both fundraise and get grants and also use the tax credits to make the economics work in a way. And we're also not looking for a return on our investment. So we are able to reinvest without needing to say, oh, well, that resale value isn't going to match what we're putting in, which is often what the homeowner is looking at in these neighborhoods. So as a catalyst for reinvestment, it's kind of critical to be a nonprofit. There are a lot of homeowners that come into older neighborhoods and then do restore them. But again, they're looking for that resale value. So there has to be a little bit more of a market. And we might be going in neighborhoods where there's less of a transitional market and trying to kind of be the catalyst for a market later.
Mm-hmm. Well, Isabel, Do you have any advice for other local preservation groups and historic societies? How do we stay relevant? How do we, the kind of cliche of get millennials and younger folks involved and engaged? Do you have any thoughts about what have you learned that other groups can learn from as well?
Well, so it's interesting you ask that, because both I worked with our local foundation and my colleague Mary Beth Mills did. Both of us worked there before this nonprofit existed. So both of us we were in our 20s and engaged with that foundation. There were a few other young people there. And so we were already kind of young people attracted to it. And trying to figure out how to make it more relevant. And I don't know that we came up with an answer while there. And I don't have a clear answer that I feel confident would work, because I haven't said this to them to say or to see if this has this outcome. But my instinct is to say, like we were talking about before, the neighborhoods, the buildings that need to be restored in Roanoke, the neighborhoods that need to be preserved, or the buildings that need to be preserved, are in communities that are often not represented in the local foundation groups. So if you have a preservation foundation in Roanoke, for example, many of the members might live in 3 or 4 neighborhoods in Roanoke, or in a few farms outside of Roanoke, but they don't necessarily represent Old Southwest, or no, there were a few in Old Southwest, but they don't necessarily represent Northwest or Southeast, and some of those are the neighborhoods that need the most reinvestment. And so my instinct is to say that maybe having the local preservation groups engage more directly in those neighborhoods, going to neighborhood meetings, going to community events, and really trying to be kind of more integrated with what the needs are in that community. Like Villa Heights, for instance, is in Northwest Roanoke. And that was a house you all had been interested in for a long time, but our local foundation been interested in for a long time. And there are a lot of very, I think, strong leaders in the Northwest community that were also interested in seeing it restored. But those two groups didn't meet. The Northwest group and the local preservation foundation weren't having a lot of discussions about it. And so that may have been a big part of why it took so long to see something happen with it. I can't say that, for certain, but I do think getting local foundations to engage really directly, going to neighborhood meetings, is not that fun. It's often on a Monday night. There are usually some cantankerous people there, and you have to sit through a lot of bureaucratic updates, but that's where I've really become so much more engaged in what these neighborhoods want to see and how we can be a resource for them. And I think then we get a broader level of support for what we do. So if you're a preservation foundation trying to get more support or interest in diversity of ages and neighborhoods and all of that, what better way than to go to neighborhoods kind of outside of the bubble of those groups, or maybe community events and that sort of thing, where you are just meeting more people that need the resources of preservation but don't know how to find them. And I think preservation can be, with a capital P, it can be a little bit intimidating, as it often is sort of assumed that it's like mothballing a big, beautiful, robber baron's home or something. Whereas in the context of what the community's needs are, it's often, it doesn't have to be so intimidating if everybody kind of connects the right resources.
Right. That's a really good point. I think it's the idea of listening and asking the right questions, and showing up to meetings like you discussed, where so often it's easy to walk in and say, here's what we think should happen, but the reality is you have to get
I'm guilty of that. I've learned that the hard way. I think I've gone to neighborhood meetings thinking that restoration housing was really well received, and then found out later I probably should have done even more kind of, I think, boots on the ground, knocking on doors, talking to people about what we're trying to do, and engaging really directly, rather than just assuming everybody wanted us to come in and restore this building, you know, and sometimes it is a little patronizing of us to assume that what we're doing is in the best interest of everybody in the neighborhood. So I've learned a lot, and even the last few months, about how to work harder to be more engaged directly. I'm a huge introvert, so it's really hard for me to be like, I have to knock on doors. I don't want to do that, but like just to be, you know, much more respectful of the fact that I'm an outsider coming in. And unless I live in that neighborhood, I am not a representative of what their best interests are. Even if I assume reducing blight is in most people's positive best interest, it's really important to not just make that assumption and come in and say, this is what I'm doing, you know?
Right, for sure. Well, it's the same thing with fundraising, right? The idea that the cold calls and such, it can be
yeah.
it can be nerve-wracking at times, but necessary.
Yeah.
So, did you want to take the last question?
Well, I guess the last question we wanted to ask is what's next for Restoration Housing? Do you guys have any exciting projects coming up that you want to share?
Yeah, I mean, so like I said, we have a project that's been under construction over the last few months. It's in Southeast Roanoke, which is exciting because Southeast Roanoke is a newly nominated historic district as of late 2018, I think. So it's called the Belmont Historic District. This house is going to be one of the first rehabs using tax credits in that district. I don't know of any others, but there may be. We literally started it, I think, right after that designation. So I was hopeful. I knew the designation was in the pipeline, but I think like it was not confirmed. Even we were going to do it either way. But since it's been confirmed, we're pretty committed to staying in Southeast for at least a few years. So we have another house that's starting construction later this fall that's also in Belmont. It's a little one. It's really cute, but it needs a ton of work. And then we have another house under purchase contract also in that neighborhood. So we basically will have about 3 houses in Southeast Roanoke by the end of this year, 1 complete, 1 under construction, and 1 in the pipeline. And so that's a lot of focus in this one neighborhood. But the neighborhood is both a new historic district, which is exciting, and that can be such a great catalyst for reinvestment. But it's also one of the neighborhoods with the highest vacancy rates in the city. So it has like a almost 17% vacancy rate. And a lot of the houses were built at the turn of the century for railroad workers, and they're just great historic housing stock that are mostly vacant. And so it's a neighborhood that I think is a great place for us to be right now.
That's fantastic. Well, and we'll include links in the description of the video, but where's the best place for folks to learn more about Restoration Housing, Isabel?
Yeah, I mean, our website, restorationhousing.org, Facebook. I don't know exactly how to say it. Just look it up on Facebook.
Yeah.
I'm not very good at our social media, but my coworker, Mary Beth, does an excellent job. So you can find all of our virtual campaign on Facebook, on Instagram. I think it's at Restoration Housing. And then on our website, you can find our virtual campaign at restorationhousing.org/preserve. And our campaign is called the Preserve Campaign, which is kind of playing on preserving architectural resources and serving the community, because it's meant to be kind of the dual purpose.
Sure. Well, and I can't recommend the videos you put out as part of the was it pre-serve, right?
Yeah.
Big serve. They're fantastic videos, really emotional, and helped kind of remind me why I do what I do as well. It's like, oh, this is a nice, pull at the heartstrings.
Oh, good. I'm glad. Yeah, that's all our videographer's amazing talent. He's so good at telling stories, so we owe it to him. But it's great to finally get footage of all of this stuff. So that is the silver lining, to be able to see. We never had a professional anything of any of our buildings. We do before and after pictures, but that's it. So to actually have video footage and talking to our tenants and putting a a real personal side to our work. It's not just preservation. We are the landlords of properties that, it's really important to me to be a good landlord and to be really responsible and respectful to our tenants. And that's a big part of our mission too, that people don't always realize, like maintaining the properties with integrity.
Sure. And it's certainly a big year for reflecting on that and property management and making sure that things are done ethically. And
yes, that's a whole other huge conversation, as you know, and our state has done a great job with trying to respond to that, trying to prevent evictions, give resources for evictions, and really be as, I think, proactive about what could happen and probably will be happening over the course of many months of, people losing their incomes and needing to stay safely housed.
Right. Well, I have to throw out there that in the office, we do call you and your husband, Lucas, the preservation power couple. Because, not to take away from restoration housing, but just to add that your husband, Lucas, has a group called History Partners that does similar work. And it's just cool that both of you are kind of tag teaming the restoration movement in Roanoke.
Yeah, so he started out doing preservation, and that's how I met him when I was actually in graduate school. Even though we're both from this area, I didn't meet him until I was living in California. And he was doing all these great rehabs downtown, and they're market rate housing, but really helping to be a catalyst for investment in parts of downtown that were still sort of on the fringes of development for a while. But now he's actually branched out and he's doing a lot of new construction as well. I think he's now built 2 new construction projects on what were formerly flat surface lots of parking in downtown, which, again, in the urban planning world, planners hate surface lots. They just eat up what could be really interesting real estate. And there's this perceived problem of parking in Roanoke that doesn't exist. Like, there's just plenty of it. And I'm fine with parking. I just want structured lots because they give, like, structure to something. You look at a map of downtown Roanoke and you just see a bunch of surface lots. So I'm really proud of him doing something with these lots to really revitalize them. And so he's been kind of dabbling in new construction and still doing some preservation as well.
Sure. Well, we wish we could clone you two and put you in every part of Virginia. But, well, Isabel, many thanks again for your time, and many congratulations on your much deserved award. And we hope that you and Lucas and your family can come up next year for a big event to celebrate.
Oh, I love that. Well, he's actually going to Richmond today, so
really?
He's there all the time. Yeah, but we love a more fun reason to go. So
sure. Well, tell him to say hi next time he's up here. And
I will. Thank you for the honor. It's such a pleasure to have somebody or a group recognize this project. It's it was from a real passion from the beginning. So to have it recognized is very validating. Probably goes without saying, but it is. So thank you.
Isabel, thank you so much for your time, and keep up the great work, and let us know how we can help. But we appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. All right, you guys take care.